Hello friends! Ever wonder how digital brushes compare to their traditional counterparts? Well, it's time to find out. In this video, I'm teaming up with one of my talented artist friends to compare traditional versus digital mixed media art. Meet Esther Nariyoshi. She's a multidisciplinary illustrator who uses a range of mediums from ink, gouache, colored pencils, and even printmaking to create her layered and playful illustrations. In case this is your first time watching one of my videos, I'm Gia Graham and I create digital art primarily in the Procreate app. I often incorporate lush flowers and foliage in my nature-inspired artwork. Esther and I will both use the same photo as a reference, and we'll walk you through our process as we each create artwork in our own mixed media style. Let's start with the supplies and setup.
Let's take a look at our art supplies. So over here I have some gouache. This one is Da Vinci Permanent Artist Gouache, and this color is Raw Sienna. You can see the bottom of the vase is kind of bright orange, so we're going to use this Holbein gouache for that. For the colder color, I'm going to mix between this lavender and this cascade green. So this is on the top row, it's the Daniel Smith watercolor. I also have two brushes. This one is a quill. It comes to a point, which is really helpful to define the edges. And this one is a deer foot. So this one is very textury. Over here, this is a fun thing. This looks like a graphite or a pencil. This one is water soluble, which means that upon contact with water, it's gonna give out its pigment, which is really, really fun to play with. In a very similar way, I also have two sticks of Neocolor 2. These are also water soluble. So when you just use them on paper, they behave like crayons or pastels. But if you add water to it, they are water soluble.
I'm on an iPad Pro using the Procreate app version 5.4, and I have my canvas set to 4000 by 3000 pixels at 300 dpi. All the brushes I'll be using can be found in the Procreate brush library. The first one is in the watercolor set. I'm going to use Bridgewater, which I have used before, but I'm going to do a quick stroke test here. Next, I'm going to use a brush from the Pastels set. I'm going to try Meadowbank for the flowers and stems. I've never used this brush before, so it'll be interesting to see how it performs. Lastly, I want a brush that I can use for the little specks in the glaze of the pottery on the reference photo. So let's head to the comic set, and I'm going to try Ragged Lane. This is another one I've never used before, so hopefully it'll work how I want it to. Since I did those quick tests for each brush, they now show up in the recent section of the brush library. So rather than searching for each brush when I need it, I can just switch back and forth from right here. For the palette, I pulled colors directly from the reference photo and then made a few adjustments just so the colors were a bit brighter and the final artwork would have enough vibrancy.
So when you look at our reference image, you might be thinking this complicated geometrical shape, but I want you to think of it as a stack of donuts. So we have 4 layers. I'm just gonna pick up my sienna and start drawing. So we have our first donut and the second one. Third. And then we have the tall donut at the bottom. And now we want to connect between the layers. Basically, you just draw a smaller stroke in between the donuts. There you go. So that's the base shape that we're going to work with.
The first thing I'm going to do is sketch out the base shape of the vase and flowers. This will be a really loose, rough sketch, and I won't be shading or adding any details, so I'm just going to use the Waratah pencil for this. Okay, I'm going to try to plot out the height because this vase is fairly tall and I still need to make room for the stems and flowers as well. Next, I can draw these sections on the neck of the vase, which are basically just rectangles. Then add the more rounded shape at the bottom. And then I can just join everything up. Like I mentioned before, I'm not adding much detail, and I'm not trying to make this drawing super realistic. But having a sketch to follow makes it much easier for me to be loose and experimental when I start painting, without worrying about the overall shape and the proportions of everything. Sometimes I'll go straight to painting, but for the most part, my brain likes to have a plan in place.
Now I'm gonna rinse out my brush and start working on the colder color. You can start working from the orange color, but I just feel like this cold color helps me to define where the rest of the things flow. On the second donut, we also have a colder tint. What's so helpful of using painting the whole body with the sienna is that it unifies the whole painting. So everything will have a tinge of the same shade. And then while it's still wet, the edges are still wet, I'm going to use the orange color so that the edges, like the water carrying those paints, can flow into each other. That gives us the beautiful interaction that mimics the glaze. I'm just gonna pick up more orange. And I'll add just a little bit more of that lavender. So in general, on the right side of the vase, it's darker because of the shadow. So I'm just gonna lay down some foundation of the shadow. Okay.
All right, I'm going to reduce the opacity on my sketch layer, and I've got the brush set to Bridgewater, which was the watercolor brush. The first thing I'll do is add the blue to the top half of this lower section. This brush is really transparent, which I'm hoping will help mimic the glazed look. And I will probably come back with the smudge tool to blend some of the overlapping areas where the color gets darker. And the rest of the neck is kind of a tan color, so I'll lay that down as well. Now here at the bottom, it's a really rich orange. The first pass of this color isn't that vibrant, but I think it'll work once I add more layers of color. Let's see, you can see a hint of the orange at the top of the vase, so I'm going to add a little here and just a little here as well. Now I'm going to switch to the smudge tool in the same brush and do a little blending. When you're painting digitally, it's really challenging to replicate the look of wet on wet paint mingling together, but I'm hoping this technique will give me a similar look, even if it's not quite the same. While I'm here, I can also use the smudge tool to blend away some of the harsh lines from the overlapping brush strokes. I'm not going to overdo it though, because I don't want this to look overly smooth. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add some of the darker orange to make this a bit more vibrant. And I can throw some of that tangerine color in there too. Now that that orange is brighter, I need to beef up the color in the blue sections as well. All right, now I can go back to blending. So I'm just pushing the color around with the smudge tool. I don't want to smooth it out too much, but I'm just trying to get those transitions to look a bit more natural. Okay, I think that works.
While things are still wet, I'm just gonna use my stick, my water-soluble crayon, to just emphasize on those shadows. So this sienna looks a little too light for me. I'm just gonna exaggerate it a bit to just add more definition. And you can also see on the left side, we have some highlights. Since things are still wet, I'm just gonna dab it by using my paper towel. Just gonna basically lift up the pigment from the paper so the color of the paper is revealed. And then here, just a teensy bit of highlight. Okay. And then I'm going to use this. You can also use ink or darker watercolor to achieve this, but I don't want to introduce way too much water, just a little bit. So I'm gonna just use my brush and then lightly add a bit of pigment. So I will just go in to emphasize the shadow a bit more. Okay, for here I am going to rinse out my brush. I lift up the paint too much, so I'm going to add some of the color back in. And I will add a bit more darker color to kind of match what's going on here. So right now the challenge is that the paper is buckling, so I have uneven paper to work with, and the gravity is pulling it to different direction. I mean, it can be really, like, it can create this really organic feel, but also I can see that this alone can be stressful. So for someone, yeah, so make sure you have your watercolor, make sure you have your paper towel handy. So if you need to lift up any paint, you can do that. Okay, here seems like things are kind of bled into each other. I'm going to just dip this directly into water to add some of the definition back in. There's no mistake that this is dark. I am going to add some color here so it doesn't look like the whole base is gonna topple. And if you do pottery, you know that when you add different glaze, different color of glaze, this type of effect happens. So the two glazes kind of bleed into each other. So this actually makes it feels more pottery. All right, so now we have our vase.
Okay, the vase needs more definition, so I need to add some of the darker values. I'll start with the darker tan, and I can always make the color even darker if I need to. So from the reference, the light is hitting the left side, so all of these shadowed areas are going to be on the right. And I'm just going to do a little blending to smooth that out just a bit. Okay, I think I need to go in with an even darker color to beef up that contrast. And this will help define the shape a bit more as well. Let's see, I'll darken up a couple areas on this bottom section as well. Again, this isn't going to be super realistic, so I don't need to be 100% accurate with this shadow placement. All right, now that color's down, I can do a little blending with the smudge tool. There's a tiny foot on this vase, so I'm going to add that in the tan color. It's a small detail and barely noticeable on the reference, but it will help to ground the shape. And the right side of that is cast in shadow as well, so I'll darken that up. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. Now I need to add a few highlights on the left side. So I'm going to switch to the eraser tool, and I have that set to Bridgewater as well. Then I can just remove some of the color to create the highlights. And I'm just going to soften some of those edges with the smudge tool. Okay, I think that's working.
For the top portion of our painting, we have lots and lots of flower. I'm not going to draw every single one of them, but I will lay down the key elements. So over here I have another stick. You can also use watercolor for this task. Basically it's just leaves, 3 cute leaves at the edge of the vase. And then I'm gonna use this graphite. Instead of drawing top down, I'm gonna draw with the direction of growth. So this feels more organic. Almost forgot. I am going to use my deer foot to lay down my flowers first because they are in lighter color and they need to go first. Again, as long as your strokes resemble the shape of a flower, that's fine. You don't have to be super duper realistic. I think that's sometimes stops a lot of people from drawing or painting is because it doesn't look exactly like the picture. But if you set out to be drawing something not realistic, you take a lot of pressure off of yourself. While things are damp, I'm gonna add in the middle part of the flower. And you can totally do this with ink or watercolor. And then we're gonna take care of the branch. So like I said, I'm gonna hold this loosely and then draw in the direction of the growth. Make sure I have lots of water. And I kind of go back and forth so the branch doesn't look like one one straight line. If you look at the branches of flower or trees, they're kind of like knotty. Okay, and then I am gonna pick up the same deer foot brush and some orange and to draw some of the buds. There you go, just one dab. There you go. Yay, we have a painting.
All right, next up I need to add the stems and flowers. I'm going to use brown for the stems, and I'm going to switch the brush to Meadowbank, which is a pastel brush I saved earlier. I'm going to try to lean into the rougher look of the texture by making the lines on the stems really loose and with fairly sharp angles. There are quite a few stems in the reference, but I don't need to draw every single one, and they don't need to match the reference perfectly. My stems are overlapping the vase here, but fortunately I drew this on a separate layer, so I can just use the eraser tool to quickly clean that up. I'm using the same brush here, but of course the leaves and flowers will have more curves and a softer look. I'm actually going to use a darker version of that green to give those leaves a tiny bit more definition. All right, now for the first flower. I'll start with the lightest orange. And just like with everything else, I'm not trying to make this too detailed. I'll just start with the basic shape, then use a darker color to create more definition, similar to what I did with the leaves. I'll just make the center darker and maybe along the edges of a couple of the petals. Then I'll use the brown for the details in the center. I'm going to do basically the same thing for the second flower as well, but this time I'll start with the darkest orange in my palette, since this flower is a bit darker in the reference. And these petals are a tiny bit brighter on the edges, so I'll just add a lighter color there. Then brown for the details here as well. We really can't see much detail on the little buds in the reference photo, so I'm just going to add a few blobs of color here and there. Okay, the last thing I want to do is add those little specks that you can see in the glaze. So let me switch to the brown. I'm going to do this on a different layer, and I'm going to use the Ragged Lane brush that I saved earlier. I've never used this brush before, so let's see how it works. So it's creating these little clusters, but I want the dots to be more spread out. What happens if I draw continuous lines? No, that's not working how I want it to either. Okay, I think I've got the hang of it now. I'm kind of tapping around, and that seems to be giving me a more randomized placement. A few more specks here along the top. And I think I'll reduce the opacity on that layer so those dots are a little less prominent. Now I think it looks more like it's part of the glaze rather than a last-minute addition. All right, I said that was the last thing, but this will be the last thing. I just want to add a shadow similar to what's shown on the reference, just because I think it will help the painting feel a little more grounded. I've gone back to the Bridgewater brush for this, by the way. And that's it. Let's see both paintings side by side. It's always fun to see how two artists can have very different interpretations of the same reference. Although the basic elements are the same, you can really see our personal style come through in these paintings. In Esther's mixed media version, you can really see the range in textures from the different mediums. The mingling of the watercolor paint, the rougher, more scratchy quality of the graphite stick, and the texture of the wax pastels all create a layered, unique aesthetic. Then, of course, Esther's fun, quirky style just adds to that. Now, even though I used 3 different brushes for the digital version, the differences in mediums are more subtle. I do think that has less to do with the brushes and more to do with my approach, though. I probably needed to be much bolder with the brush marks and textures in order for it to be more obvious that it's a quote-unquote mixed media piece. I still really like how it turned out, though, and I'm actually inspired to get a little bolder with the textures in my work. Thanks so much for doing this painting experiment with me, Esther. If you'd like to see more of Esther's work, you can check out her YouTube channel, watch her online courses, or check out her digital products. I'll leave links in the description for all the places you can find her. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love if you'd give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.